Skeletor. So, as you might have guessed, yesterday I went to go see the Masters of the Universe movie in theaters. Master of the Universe is the second live-action He-Man movie. This one's directed by Travis Knight, and it is currently out in theaters. I went to go see it yesterday, and here are my thoughts. Why am I holding this if I could just clip it to my shirt? There, simple and easy. So to get right into this one, I was not the biggest fan of the Master of the Universe movie. Hey, wait a minute, let me explain myself, guys. You see, yesterday I put out a short review, kind of like my immediate out of the theater reaction, and for the most part, what I said, I still believe. But then after recording the review, I came home, looked at the score of this movie on IMDb, the better of the movie rating sites, and saw that it had a pretty good score, pretty contrary to what I reviewed. And also on Rotten Tomatoes, it has a, above average score for critics and pretty good score for audiences. So I thought, like, what gives? Why didn't I like this film that much? So I sat around and kind of contemplated my thoughts and came up with these reasons why I might have not liked this film. So to start off, like, my biggest gripe with this film overall is the fact that it just felt like one of your typical Marvel movies. It had a pretty similar plot structure to most of the Marvel movies, at least most of the good ones, and it followed that pretty beat for beat, like to the point where I was sitting in the theater and I went, okay, in this scene this is gonna happen, okay, in this scene this character is gonna say this, and I was about 99% right. This film for me had no like twists and turns, no surprises. So to me, as somebody who looks at a film, more critically than the general audience member, for me that kind of pissed me off, because I'm sitting here thinking, I could have came in, watched the first 30 minutes of this movie, thought about the ending in my head, and then just left, because it's exactly what happened. Now what I will say is what did happen was, fun. The action was good. The movie did those corny one-liners that happen in Marvel movies where the camera zooms in on the character and he says, "Now it's your turn to die." And they go into a battle, which is fun, it's a fun time. It's just so hard for me to like a movie that's just so predictable and it recycles the same plot beats that I've seen in other movies. And now that goes into the second reason why I think I wasn't such a big fan of this movie, and it's because I don't know anything about this IP. He-Man and just Masters of the Universe in general is completely new to me. I didn't know anything. Like I said in my shorts review, the only thing I knew about this is that meme that was popular like 10 years ago. But other than that, I didn't know anything about He-Man or Masters of the Universe or any of those characters. Actually, I lied. I knew Skeletor. Skeletor! So here's the thing. I'm not super caught up on the lore, so if He-Man was like the first of its kind to do this kind of stuff, so in turn, it made me not appreciate it as much, but if like what happened in the movie happens in like the show or whatever like lore it came from, then like I apologize because I didn't know this, but it still stands true to me because I just didn't know that this existed before. But to me, it just feels like recycled plot beats, a recycled story that this film took from another superhero movie and just put a Masters of the Universe skin on top of. So for me, I didn't get any of the excitement that somebody who's a fan of this might get from seeing their favorite hero on screen. I didn't get that just because I didn't know these characters, so this whole thing was a brand new learning experience for me. But I guess apart from Skeletor, there's one other thing that I sort of knew going into this movie, or at least I thought I knew going into this movie, which leads me into my third gripe with this film, which is the comedy. I genuinely didn't think this movie was all that funny. Now, going into this, I knew that He-Man had a comedic aspect to it. I knew that the show was pretty funny, and like the few clips that I saw here and there throughout my life were like funny moments with like Skeletor. And so going into this movie, I kind of figured that the comedy would be the strong aspect of this movie. I didn't know anything about the character and I didn't know, any of the lore, but if the movie was funny, I was gonna have a good time. So to go into this movie and see that it had, the most, low-hanging fruit jokes. The jokes felt like I've seen them in other films before. The main like comedy of this movie had to do with, He-Man kind of being a fish out of water in the beginning of the story, where it felt like he didn't belong on Earth, but then also felt like he didn't belong on his home planet. And so in both instances, you kind of get him in a fish out of water sort of deal, and the jokes that they decided to use kind of just felt like recycled jokes that I've seen in another movie. Like, they have a point where He-Man's in a store. This happens early on, so it's not too big of a spoiler, but He's in a store and he's trying to grab a certain object in that store that belongs to him. He just kind of awkwardly goes around asking people where this object is. It wasn't super funny, and then when he finds that object and it like makes him look like a crazy person, people are out there, you know, taking videos on their phone, which is a joke that I've seen hundreds of times, you know, making fun of people these days, filming things rather than, you know, stepping in and helping. That is just something that like isn't funny anymore. It's something that I've seen a million other times. So it's just stuff like that. The movie didn't make me laugh very much. I will say there was one semi-funny joke about butt worms that I thought was pretty funny, and I kind of let out a laugh in theaters. But like even the rest of my theater, I would say like I laughed at one time, but I'd say overall in a movie that had, let's say, 100 jokes in it, give or take, this movie probably landed maybe 4 or 5 of them with the crowd. The rest of the time they would say a joke and the movie theater was just crickets. Like not even a chuckle, nothing. It was just dead silent, and I knew that they were trying to make a joke. It just didn't land. My other biggest disappointment is just Skeletor himself. I always thought going into this that Skeletor was like one of the bigger, you know, comedy relief aspects. I thought he was one of those villains that was trying to be evil, but then he just kind of was funny at the same time. That's just kind of what my preconceived notion going into this film was, but Skeletor wasn't funny at all. He wasn't like even that evil. He was just kind of in this weird middle ground where he was just kind of there or whatever. Also, for as evil as Skeletor is, he's also quite forgiving, because there's several points in this movie where Skeletor has the upper hand over like the whole squad of people who are after him, and instead of just like finishing them off quickly or just like, you know, making it so that they can't escape at all, he's very lenient with the stuff he does. Like having characters in places where there's no one around to guard them, and where they can easily come back out of the place that he puts them in. Way to go, Skeletor. Now, I'm sure that's a little bit of his character, but like I said, they play Skeletor so seriously for the most part, where it feels like they were going for the very evil side of him and not so much like the goofy buffoon side of him that might accidentally, you know, overlook some of these things. So it was really hard to judge whether that was kind of on purpose or it was more just bad storytelling. Also, side note, I don't know if anyone else had an issue with this, maybe it was just the audio in my theater, but Skeletor was extremely hard to understand. Half the time I had to piece together his sentences to understand what he's saying using context clues, because whoever voiced him or whatever like modulator they put on the voice just made him really hard to understand. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm just growing old and my ears are starting to not work, you know? But yeah, whether it's Skeletor or the rest of the characters, the jokes just didn't work for me, and maybe I'm just, you know, not funny anymore. Maybe I'm just old and starting to grow, you know, angry at the world, and I just don't find any movie funny anymore. God damn it, you youngsters. Now, my final gripe with this movie, and it's not as bad as the other ones that I just said, it's a bit of a smaller issue, but this movie had like over $150 million budget, and for having that much of a budget, some of the CGI looked kind of trash. There's an action scene in the forest where He-Man and his like friends fight some random goons, and there's some shots in that fight scene that genuinely took me out of the movie. It was really bad. It was like on par with like Star Wars Episode 6, where they're in the speeders in the forest and the CGI just looks really outdated. Now, it's not that bad, but like it took me out like that much of the movie. I was like, yikes, that looks really poor. And also a few of the scenes where the characters are kind of walking around with like green screen stuff in the background, like green screen backgrounds, and there's like this CGI tiger. When they're standing next to the CGI tiger, it looks really apparent, especially at the end of the movie. There's a shot at the end of the film, and I'm just like, yikes, like that character does not look like he belongs in that background. So yeah, for as big of a budget that this movie got, you would think that the CGI would look flawless, but no. I mean, for the most part, it looks good. Like, especially the stuff on He-Man's home planet looks good for the most part, but there was, you know, stuff here and there that I was like, damn. Now, for the most part, the plot in this movie, like I said, is generic, but it works, you know. But there's a part in this movie right in the middle where the characters are seemingly gonna go do this one thing, and then there's a scene where Skeletor says something, and the characters completely change their entire plan. You know, they have to go somewhere, and it's something that would have to happen over, you know, a longer period of time, but instead the movie just cuts immediately to them at that place. You know, they're like, hey, instead of going this way, we're gonna go this way to this place. and then the next scene is just them there, even though they're like nowhere near that area, and it would take like a whole adventure in and of itself to get there. So that part just felt really rushed. It felt like they knew that the characters were somewhere far away and it would have to take them a lot of time to get there, but they didn't want to tell any of that story because the movie would take too long. So they just immediately took them there. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Masters of the Universe. I mean, like I said, I feel like if I, was with a group of friends, we had a couple of adult beverages and this movie was on, I feel like I'd have a good enough time with it. But in terms of an actual movie where I sit down and lock in, it just didn't do it for me. I tried to lock in the movie theaters and I was just getting really bored really fast. So yeah, if you like this video, please give me a like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next one.